I am Shanae Dawkins, and me and my colleague Jody Jacobs, we are computer scientists at NIST. We're in the usability group at NIST, which is a bit different for this conference here. But we'll be talking to you today about our phishing project and the NIST Phish Scale, and our talk is Phishing with a Net, talking about the Phish Scale with cybersecurity awareness training. So let's get started. So quickly, just our standard disclaimer. If we mention any products, doesn't imply endorsement by NIST or RSA. Okay, so how many people in here believe that a phishing email exists that no one will click on? Not a single person. Right, so someone will always click on the email, right? Why is that? Anybody know? Huh? Don't pay attention, right? So today we're going to discuss a method you can use to answer the why called the NIST Phish Scale. But before we explain the NIST Phish Scale and how considering the human element has been beneficial to organizations, we need to understand situations there where the NIST Phish Scale is meant to be used. So let's start with the big picture. First, I'll quickly highlight the landscape of phishing threats and some aspects of phishing awareness training to defend against those threats. So as we all know, phishing continues to be one of the top threats to organizations. You guys already know all the stuff on the screen, especially spear phishing, BEC, business email compromise, smishing, vishing, you guys know all of this stuff. That's why good phishing defense is really important, right? But I do want to point out something. According to the SonicWall report, 77% of organizations are more concerned about phishing attacks than other cybersecurity attacks. And so what are organizations doing about these threats? Technology is the ideal solution, right? Users don't have to make any click decisions. They don't have to click on a link or attachment or anything. That's great. But the reality is that filters don't block all incoming messages containing malware, right? Still about 10% get through. And then we have process, includes phishing awareness and training. It takes a commitment by the organization to put training in place, leverage metrics, and to mitigate risks. And then finally, organizations need good cybersecurity professionals for defense purposes, but also need well-informed end users, right? Who understand their role in protecting the larger organization and themselves. And so organizations' phishing defense must be multi-pronged, right? You need all three of these, looking beyond just the technology alone to mitigate against phishing attacks. So the people, process, and technology must work together in tandem. So, as I said, we're the usability people. Our research is particularly concerned with people and process. So why are we doing that? Why are we focusing on the people for this phishing issue? Well, for many organizations, phishing is the last line of defense against the phishing threat, right? As I said before, 10% of those emails are still getting through. So let's start with process. Oh, excuse me. All right, so what does this training look like in practice? Phishing training typically goes behind annual compliance training, right? One of the most common is embedded phishing awareness programs where you have a simulated phish that mimics a real-world threat that goes out via some sort of software. There's a lot of software that does this. Some of them are here at the expo. Not going to mention any of them here by name. You can find out when you walk through. And so if an email user clicks on an embedded link or attachment, they get a warning that this was a training exercise and some extra training on how to spot a phish in the future. I will say, however, though, that's the most common. The Proofpoint State of the Phish that was released earlier this year says only 35% of organizations conduct the phishing simulations, right? So while it's the most common, still not everyone is doing it. We also see from the OBehave report from the National Cybersecurity Alliance that more than half of participants are better at recognizing phishing emails after they receive some training, right? So training works, and this embedded training works, but not everyone's doing it. And then, so what metrics do we get from these training programs that assess their effectiveness? So click rates is the main one, right? Most people report on click rates. That's the most common one for organizations to reflect staff proficiency in identifying fraudulent emails. Organizations are also starting to begin to look at reporting rates, right? But you need the infrastructure and resources to be able to have a really effective reporting program, right? You need to have a button in your Outlook or your mail client or whatever else you're doing to be able to do that. And then the IT department has to receive it, and how are they handling it? How are they notifying folks? So you need a lot more than to be able to handle reporting rates. And then you should also consider repeat clickers and protective stewards, right? So there was a study published in 2021 by Matthew Canham that looked at these two groups of people, right? So the repeat clickers were the people in the study that fell for a phish multiple times. So 3 or more times they fell for the phish clicking on the link or attachment. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have protective stewards. Those in the study never fell for any of the phish and reported at least 3 phish during that study. So looking at those is a good start to going beyond just looking at click rates. But for a second, let's look at just click rates alone, right? There's a lot of variability in click rates, right? They're all over the map. You don't know what they are. And so we conducted at NIST a research study to explain why click rates for phishing exercises were variable and not just continually approaching 0. So there was one operating unit at NIST doing a project with this embedded phishing awareness program, right, with simulated real-world phishes. The project was over 4.5 years with 15 different phishing exercises, about 1 a quarter. And what we found was that click rates, or these numbers, don't tell the whole story, right? And so we used survey research to investigate this further. Now we're getting to the fun part, the human element, right? So the survey led us down this path. What role does the human play in all of this? And so what we really want to know with the survey is this. Some users click, some don't. Why is that? So you see the first 3 people in this graphic got the email. All right, definitely this is a phish, not clicking on it. But then the last one, sure, I'll click on that. That looks legit, right? Why is that? What are the differences here? And so during the study, we used a training software to track who clicked and who didn't. Those who clicked immediately got a follow-on survey that asked them some questions. And then those who did not click on any links or attachments, about a week later, after the email was sent out, they received a survey asking about their behaviors for not clicking on the email. And so we'll present some of those survey results here. So the key finding from our survey was user context influences clicking behavior, right? So it is the lens through which people see and interpret an email, right? That's the theme that ties all of our results together. It all ties back to this user's context. But who is the user? So the NIST phish scale, which we'll talk about later, that's for training implementers. That's for most of the people in this room. End users for this situation are the people typically checking their emails, typically the employees in an organization. It's their context that influences email behaviors and decision making. So our research found in these 4 main areas there were huge differences between clickers, those who clicked on the link or attachment, and non-clickers, those who did not. So first, starting with email premise, that's what their job is, what are their roles and responsibilities, things they've done recently. And then for interpreting cues, you have compelling cues, like it's from, well, since this was in this study, from a federal employee, looks like it comes from a federal employee. Or suspicious cues, like domain spoofing, attachment mismatches, et cetera. And then we have reality checking, things like searching for the sender in the NIST directory. And then finally, concern over consequences for click or non-click actions. And so I'll just walk through some of the things our participants did in our study. So to give some context for one of these, one of the emails one of the phishing emails was of an unpaid invoice, right? That was the context. This invoice was unpaid. Here's a link, here's an attachment. So clickers said things like, I pay invoices, so I was wondering what invoice this was that did not get paid. The email's premise aligned perfectly for end users who have payment responsibilities. And then there were others whose roles and responsibilities didn't align with the email's premise. Non-clickers said things like, I don't deal with invoices or anything having to do with accounts payable or accounts receivable. All right, And so we'll move on to a different email for interpreting cues, not the unpaid invoice one. Clickers said things like, the unfamiliar email is common at work and generally not a problem. It did not trigger anything in my brain that would indicate that it was harmful. So this did not trigger anything, right? Not noticing any suspicious cues at all. And then you have non-clickers who say, upon rereading the email, I became very suspicious. The email references a doc attachment, but the attachment was a zip file. So they're attending to suspicious cues, noticing any inconsistencies and things like that. And then so for reality checking, now I do want to point out that only non-clickers did any sort of reality checking. Clickers didn't do any sort of reality checking or fact checking or anything like that. Clickers said things like, the email was from a NIST employee, figured she worked in AR, that's accounts receivable, and or finance. And then non-clickers went a step further, saying things like, I didn't think I had any unpaid invoices, and then I looked up Joe Preston, that's who the email looked like it was from, and the NIST directory, and the person didn't exist. So they're going beyond the face value of the email and digging deeper and doing more fact checking. And then finally, we have concerns over consequences, where clickers were concerned over not clicking and being unresponsive, which is normally a good trait in an employee. You want them to be responsive to their emails. Clickers said things like, I'm always interested in ensuring that I get any messages and act on them. Whereas non-clickers were concerned about clicking and downloading any malware or viruses. And they said things like, I was concerned something might be downloaded onto my computer or I could get a virus. And so you have this user context. So overall, our findings from the study show that clickers had an unrealistic faith in institutional security. They were overconfident in firewalls and filters and more likely to take email at face value and not question it at all. Whereas non-clickers had a more tempered and realistic view of security. They understand that they're a target. They were engaging in deeper processing, rereading the email multiple times, noticing suspicious cues, and fact-checking. And so now what? You have all this understanding now. You know that human element is key. User context is really important. So in focusing on the human element, phishing training programs cannot be assessed in a vacuum. You must consider this human element when engaging the effectiveness of your phishing exercises and the progress of the awareness program over time. But how do we do that? So our research led us to create the NIST Phish Scale to provide a necessary measure of user context to those variability in the click rates. So I'll quickly show a video of a way to consider the human element in phishing awareness training.
If you're online, you're a target for phishing. Phishing is when a cyber criminal pretends to be a reputable entity or person and asks you to click a link or download an attachment that is really malware. You also may be asked to share personal information, such as passwords or bank account information. Savvy email users are the best defense against phishing attacks that computers don't catch. But not all phishing is easy to spot. To better combat phishing attacks, we need to better understand the quality and sophistication of phishing attacks. Introducing a Phish Scale. Created by NIST researchers using real measurement data, the Phish Scale classifies emails based on how difficult or easy it is to detect the potential attack. The scale looks at two main components. Number 1, observable characteristics or cues of the phishing email itself. The more cues there are, the easier it is for a user to realize the email may be phishing. Number 2, alignment of the email's context to the user. This component includes a rating system under which each item has a point value. Emails with fewer cues and more relevant context are more difficult to identify as a phishing email. The hope is that if we can better categorize phishing detection difficulty, we can better understand not just the attacks, but also what makes people more or less likely to click. And from there, organizations can understand their phishing vulnerabilities so they can better combat and bounce back from these attacks.
All right, great. So that video showed a way to incorporate the 4 main findings, right, from the earlier user context slides, from the study into measuring whether an email is easy or difficult to detect as a phish. It was created in 2019 using the real-world empirical data from the study I mentioned earlier. And so the NIST Phish Scale is a metric incorporating the human element to contextualize click rates in the organization's phishing awareness program. So I always like showing that video. Our great NIST media team made that video. They win all kinds of awards and stuff, so I like showing it every time I get. And so Jody is next, and she will discuss the use of the Phish Scale, and that's been used in practice, and wrap up with some actionable guidance. All right, Jody, you're up.
So thank you, Shanae. So because we're computer scientists and we love math, let's show the NIST Phish Scale as a math equation. Email queues plus premise alignment results in an email's detection difficulty. So let's start off with queues. So what are queues? Queues are properties of an email that compel a user to click on a fraudulent link or attachment, or they serve as red flags alerting the user that the email may be a phish. The NIST Phish Scale analyzes 23 queues, and here are some samples of those queues, such as spelling mistakes, imitation of logos or branding, and time pressure. One thing to note is that the 2023 Proofpoint State of the Phish report stated that 44% of people think that an email is safe when it contains familiar branding. The second part of the Phish Scale is the premise alignment. And so let's do a deeper dive into the premise alignment. The premise alignment is characterizing the relevancy of an email's premise or alignment to your target audience. It's based on your target audience's workplace roles and responsibilities, culture, business practices, and staff expectations. When training implementers categorize a premise alignment for a phish, it is crucial that they should have knowledge about the target audience's context of work, including their tasks and activities. The premise alignment is broken out into 5 premise alignment elements. The first element is, does the email mimic a workplace process or practice of the target audience? For example, an invoice email sent to the accounts payable department. The second is the email relevant to the workplace? For example, a coupon to go skydiving is not relevant to a typical work environment, unless that's your business. The third is, does the email align or is it related to current events? And these events can be either internal or external to the workplace. For example, a Valentine's Day email sent around mid-February versus getting it now at late April. The fourth is, would the target audience be concerned if they don't click the email? For example, an email demanding money, or you'll be reported to local authorities. And lastly, has the targeted audience received any targeted training or specific warnings about an upcoming training or exercise? Okay, so when you put queues and premise alignment together, you get the last component of the Phish Scale, and that is detection difficulty, which simply put is, how hard or easy is the email to detect as a phish? So here's a graphical depiction showing the relationship between the three components of the phish scale. Along the x-axis, you'll see the Q rating. Thank you, Sinead. And along the y-axis, you'll see the premise alignment rating. So when you chart these both out, you get the resulting detection difficulty, which is indicated by the different colored fishes. And so as you can see, like in the video, emails with fewer Qs and a higher premise alignment results in an email that is very difficult to detect as a phish, as depicted by the pink fishes. So that's the NIST phish scale. And so now let's talk about what happens when we apply the phish scale. And here are some samples of simulated fishes sent to one NIST operating unit during the project that Sinead talked about earlier. The email on the left talks about safety, and you'll see some cues like a spoofed upper management email address, and if you look really, really closely, you'll see that it came from a Gmail account. So when we applied the NIST phish scale, we calculated a high premise alignment because NIST has a strong safety culture, and the email appears to come from upper management, and a very difficult detection difficulty. And for these reasons, this email had a high click rate with almost 50%, that's 50% of recipients clicking on the email. The email on the right talks about an unpaid invoice. And you'll see a few cues like an unknown sender, there is no Jill Preston at NIST, and remember her from one of the earlier participant quotes that Sinead talked about earlier. And it looks like there is an attached invoice. So when we applied the phish scale, we calculated a high premise alignment because a large number of the target audience processes invoices, and they were on high alert because they recently received and missed it and were reprimanded about an actual invoice payment. And we also noticed a very difficult detection difficulty. And for these reasons, this email had a 20% click rate, which is a little bit lower than the other email, but still relatively high compared to the other phishing emails in the study. And here's one more email that talks about weblogs. And you'll see some cues like there is no personalization, but it came from an email that looks legitimate because it ends in @nist.gov. And some threatening language about disciplinary action for accessing and viewing restricted websites, which is a violation of NIST's rules of conduct and grounds for dismissal for every employee. So when we applied the phish scale, we calculated a high premise alignment and a very difficult detection difficulty. And for these reasons, this email had a high click rate with, again, almost 50% of recipients clicking on the email. So now let's talk about applying the phish scale to your organization. The premise alignment and ultimately the detection difficulty are designed to use a target audience. That is, again, a group of people with similar roles and responsibilities. Many organizations conduct phishing exercises in application of the phish scale as a one-size-fits-all approach, where they calculate one premise alignment and one detection difficulty. But as you all know, organizations come in many different shapes, sizes, and have a diverse workforce. So the question that we faced is, how do you apply the phish scale to your whole organization with a variety of job functions? So based on organizational operational data, not NIST's, and an extensive literature review, we set out to answer this question. One way we found out was to break out premise alignment element number 2, workplace relevance, into specific job families that are based on their roles and responsibilities. Now, we use these job families, but feel free to use whatever fits your organization. And the job families we used are administrative support, core mission employees, and these employees perform day-to-day organizational activities. Facility field employees like security guards and facility repair staff, and facility office employees. And these are the higher level facility operations staff. We also used legal, management, including directors, deputy directors, and C-suite executives like CIOs, CISOs, and lastly, organization support staff like human resources, information technology, and accounts receivable. So let's look at applying this approach to one of the earlier phishing examples, the unpaid invoice phish. When the phish scale is applied using the whole organization approach, it had a low premise alignment and was very easy to detect as a phish. But when the phish scale is applied to each of the job families, such as the organization's support staff job family, which includes accounts receivable, had a high premise alignment and a very difficult detection difficulty rating, while the other job families had a lower premise alignment and a lower detection difficulty rating, since they don't usually process invoices. So as you can see, when you apply the phish scale to different job families, you get more granularity and meaningful data, provided needed context to click rates. Okay, so let me give you some final parting thoughts. Thanks. It's okay. An organization needs to have a multi-pronged approach to identify, react to, and report suspicious phishes. It takes technology, processes, and people to effectively combat phishing. Organizations could maybe get click rates down to 0 for a repeated phish, but that doesn't represent the variety of real-world phishes. An email's premise will always align for somebody, and somebody is gonna always click on that email for a free restaurant gift card, right? All right. User context is an important aspect of phishing susceptibility and can help tailor training, phishing training to an organization's environment and employees. Using click rates as the sole metric for determining a phishing program's effectiveness is like fishing without a net. Organizations need to look beyond click rates and consider the human element in their phishing and cybersecurity awareness program. So now let's talk about applying what you've learned with some short-term and long-term goals. Next week, you should share what you've learned in this presentation with members of your team regarding premise alignment and phishing cues. If you do already have a phishing awareness program, examine the context and premise alignment of the phishing emails that have already been used. But if you don't already have a phishing awareness program, consider simulated phishing training or training about phishing cues and the importance of understanding user context. In the first 3 months following this presentation, you should tailor your phishing awareness program to your organization's current threats while still meeting your organization's mission and risk tolerance. Secondly, you should contextualize training data results with your staff's roles and responsibilities. And lastly, reassess the impact of your phishing program in your organization. For example, can it provide an additional metric of programmatic effectiveness? So here's our big takeaway, and I know I may sound like a broken record, but in an organization's phishing defense, consider the human elements of phishing training. Training and human elements should go hand in hand. So thank you for your time. Here's our contact information and a link to learn more about the phish scale. You'll see a QR code up there, which links back to our phishing webpage. And on this page, you'll find information about our publications, some tutorials, and our phishing research. And I think we have some time for some questions. And because who doesn't love free stuff, we have some NIST phishing awareness and phishing training stickers that you can get after. So I guess if you want to, I think there's microphones on either side of the room. I was told if you have any questions, feel free to.
If you do want a
Head to the-
laptop
yes.
sticker, just comment to us afterwards.
Yeah.
You can have a laptop sticker.
Any questions? Are we that good? Okay.
Hi. You mentioned you had a group of 50% of some people clicked on one phishing email, 50% of another group. Was that the same 50% in each case? Are there some people just inclined to click on things?
So for the study, no, it's not necessarily some people. So our study did not look at repeat clickers. That wasn't the focus of it. But some people are. And I encourage you to look up the Matthew Canham study that I mentioned earlier in the slides, because he specifically looked at that, who were the repeat clickers and how many people were more inclined to just click on anything versus those who were not. And I think there's a mix, right? There's some people that are, have a little bit of suspicion and only fall for a couple, but there's some people that just click on everything. So that wasn't our focus in our study, but I would definitely recommend the other one.
Was there an age component to that? Younger people more likely to click than older people, or older people more likely than younger?
Also something we did not investigate in the study.
Thank you.
But I will say, so in working a little bit more with Matthew Canham for a different study, no. It just depends on the context for the user. So if the context is more for younger people, then yes, they are more willing, like students are more willing to click on just anything, right? At a university, right? They feel Bahama Breeze, ooh, let's go, right? You have a delivery, they'll click on anything. But when it's in a workplace environment, it's a little bit different.
Really amazing research. My question is with regards to how do you report this to the board? The board normally, and executives, they want to see downward trending. And if they see an uptick in phishing, does it mean that your program is ineffective? And what's an effective way to communicate this?
Right, and so that's really the importance of having the fish scale, right? So you can show them that the reason that this there was an uptick is because this was a really difficult email to detect as a phish, right? This was a really hard one for them, so that's why it's high. It's not that the program is failing, it's just that this was a really hard phish, right? And then I think for easier phish, you can say, well, if this phish was easy and the click to detect and the click rate was still really high, then there's some training that needs to be adjusted going forward when you explain that out.
And I think additionally, like you can use those metrics maybe to leverage additional resources. Like maybe we need like a more robust phishing awareness program software, or we need more training, or we need like ability to print posters.
Different types of training.
Yeah. So I would look at it as more as like feedback, not failure, as they say. Nice. But of course, you have to look at trends over time too, and not just like one snapshot from one exercise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. So I know the focus of this study was based on the workplace environment. Do you have any plans on adapting this toward just the general consumer environment to find out what makes consumers susceptible, absent being involved in a workplace or anything like that?
So, yes. So we've looked at workplace environments. Right now it's just been mostly focusing on government agencies, right? So we're branching out to looking at other agencies beyond NIST, right? We already started looking at some other data. That's actually where the latter half of the presentation came from, looking at data outside of NIST, but also looking at industry. And we've worked with someone else looking at universities, right? And the faculty and staff there and the students there. We have not broadened out to the general public just yet, but we are slowly reaching out more and more to get more data, right? Because it's a research project for us, right? The fish scale. So we want to keep improving and making better and look at different things that we can incorporate into it that help, I guess, go into or impact a user's click decisions or non-click decisions.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for doing this very important research. It's very helpful.
Thank you.
The one question I have for you is there any development going on that's going to take this fish percentage, scale that you've identified and be able to maybe incorporate that into the actual email? I mean, what we've got right now is that we put headers out to external emails coming in, makes it easier for the employees to see that if they get an email from the CEO, they don't even have to look at the email address because they'll see this large banner that says, this is an external email. And I've got everyone sort of programmed to, like, if I see that and it's coming from somebody inside, then obviously it's a fake. But what would be helpful is as we increase the difficulty of our phishing tests, sometimes people still miss it. And what would be helpful, and at one point I really wanted to not have the banner be implemented on our phishing email test because I thought it was a level of cheating, which kind of is, makes the report looks really good, but it's not really helping the employees in that regard. But is there a way or is there any research going on that you can incorporate your scale into the email somewhere and say, this has a 40% chance of being a risky email, to at least elevate the end user from whatever, because it seems like you've kind of focused, you're doing spear phishing, so like you're sending invoices to accountants, which that's their job. That's how spear phishing works. But is there a way that if you send it to these guys that they could get a fish percentage rate somewhere embedded in the email, preferably in the header or something that would say, hey, this is a 60% chance of it being a fraudulent email, to be careful. Is there anything in that regard?
So the fish scale is intended for the training implementers, not the end user, right? So it's designed to give context about the email to the person running the training. Or if it's a real world fish, just giving context to a phishing email in general. Not for the end user to say, hey, there's a really high chance this is a fish, right? That wasn't the goal of the fish scale, right? It's an additional metric for organization, not for the end user checking the email, but that is an interesting point that we will talk about later. There may be some other way to look at that. That would be separate kind of.
Incorporate AI into some of this, so
Oh.
ChatGPT? Yeah.
I don't
Maybe later.
about it, but just other tools that we
Yeah.
and it would even work for
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Yes, let me repeat the question, or unless you want to repeat it at the mic. I can repeat it for you. So he was asking about, is there a way to incorporate AI into this, right? And that is something some people have started to look at. So whereas right now, to incorporate the fish scale into your training programs, you have an email that you're sending out to employees. You look at that email and assess the email against the fish scale, right? You have the 23 Qs, you have the premise alignment you're going through. There's a user guide coming in the future for the fish scale. So you're going through perhaps the user guide and you're doing it all by hand. There's some people looking at AI to just pop in the email and then say, just pop out what the result is, whether if it's easy or difficult to detect as a fish. So people are starting to look into that. I'm not exactly sure where they are in it, though. But people have thought about it in that way. Any other questions? Oh, yes?
One question. Phishing, smishing, vishing originally seemed defined as obtaining credentials, right? Phishing for credentials. And it seems to have evolved maybe in public media, and I'm just curious about NIST, to include anything you do to open an attachment or click a link that causes malware to be on your computer, such as crypto lockers. So has the definition of phishing, vishing, smishing changed beyond obtaining credentials to all of the above for malware on computers?
So,
you go
okay.
ahead.
So I will say that's why we always define what we mean when we start our presentations, because different people look at it differently. When we're looking at it for the fish scale and applying the fish scale, it's looking at the email itself, right? So the link in the email could go off to some web page and then they haven't done anything there, but then they're asking for all of your credentials, right? And then you can submit something at that point. We're not analyzing that other extra page. We're analyzing the face value of the email itself, looking what's there, and looking at the cues there within the email. And so for this project, I won't say phishing in general. For this project, that's where we define phishing, right? The link or attachment in the email itself. We're seeing more emails that are just not having a link or attachment, just saying, hey, respond back, whether it's respond to the email, respond to text, or anything like that. That's still considered a phishing email to us. But we haven't gone as far as defining it, whether it's credentials or anything like that, or beyond that.
Yeah, sometimes the emails are like, you have a Teams request, or here's a printing output. You know, like people are using their printers to scan, and here's a document, and they're gaining access that way. So it isn't always just like, give me your username and password. I think emails are becoming more sophisticated in that aspect. So I know I just got an email. Oop, are we running out of time? Okay. I know. I know. I just recently got an email saying like, "Oh, you forgot to go to this website for." And they used RSA, and to click on this link and make sure your presentation looks okay. I was like, I don't think so. You know, so it's just like you want to. I think it was like, what was it? Stop, think, click, or stop, think, connect. Yeah. So it's just kind of asking people to take a step back, think about the email. Like look at where it came from, look at the cues, and then just kind of overanalyze an email. And I know that's difficult to do because we get so many emails, so many days. I know I get a lot of emails, and you're just like, well, is this real? Is it legit? Is it not legit? So.
All right, any other questions? We saved a lot of time for questions. All right, well, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Feel free to come get a laptop sticker, email us. Thank you very much.